Good morning, everyone. Welcome to EMPA's webinar for July 2024. In the spirit of reconciliation, EMPA recognises the traditional owners of the lands on which we all meet today and the communities of many diverse peoples across the country and the world, with their continuing connection to land, place, waters and culture. We respectfully acknowledge and honour all Indigenous communities, past, present and future, and we're grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. My name is Barbara Ryan. I'm a Director of EMPA, and on behalf of EMPA, I'm welcoming all of you here today. We have over 160 registrations for this webinar, and we're really looking forward to a strong discussion from our presenters and you all. If you haven't attended a webinar with us before or used Zoom webinars, you can find the controls and the buttons by moving your cursor to the top and the bottom of the screen. You can jump on the chat panel anytime to talk with your fellow participants. Just be sure that you have chat with everyone selected at the top of your chat window so that everyone will see your comment. And during the talk today, we're going to be asking for audience questions, and we'll just ask you to put those into the Q&A panel. It's a little bit easier to sort those from the chat than from the chat, which tends to get a little bit busy. If you have any questions or issues and you can't access the chat, shoot us through an email at via webinars@hpe.com.au. So today's webinar is about the project that won the EMPA 2024 Award for Excellence in Response Communication. It was an absolute standout. So we're really pleased that we can present this to you today. And I might even say it's a worldwide exemplar in terms of the collaboration, cross-agency coordination and the teamwork that was involved. And because it comes from Queensland, we'll also throw in some cascading disasters. Today's webinar is Severe Weather Threat, Triple Threat and One Voice, the Queensland Experience. It's about the Queensland Crisis Communications Network that has been established to bring key government and stakeholder communicators together to provide a single point of truth and to support those at the coalface in our most disaster-prone state. We're joined today by 4 amazing members of that team. Their bios are on the EMPA website, and the HPE team will put a link in the chat for you to have a look at those if you haven't already read them. Prue Laven, Penny Dahl, Lachlan Clark are from the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and Chrissie McLeod is from Queensland Police. They will discuss how the Queensland Crisis Communications Network operates and the obstacles faced during the Queensland Government's communications response to recent cascading disaster events that started with Cyclone Jasper, involved a wild storm at the Gold Coast, and finished with Cyclone Kirrily, all in less than a month. Importantly, the Queensland Crisis Communication Network demonstrates the way the EMPA principles provide a strong foundation for good emergency communication, especially Principle 1, which is a seat at the table, and Principle 5, creating networks. So let's get started. I'll start with you, Prue. You're going to give us an overview. Over to you.
I am, and thanks, Barb. We're really happy to share the story on the back of the success of the EMPA Awards for the Department of Premier and Cabinet's submission for the Queensland Crisis Comms Network, or as we call it, the CCN, response to the triple threat disasters over December 2023 and January 2024. And you've outlined what those were, so thank you. I'd also just like to start before we get into our discussion that we acknowledge that while we're here today to talk about the success of the CCN in responding to the disasters, there are still some communities that are still feeling the effects of these events and are in the process of recovering. So we just share that thought. I'll also mention that I'm new to the role of the acting chair for the CCN and was not part directly of the team's response to the success of the CCN during the triple threats. But today you'll hear more from Penny, Lachlan and Chrissie, who were there at the face of it all. But for context, in DPC, we have an all hazards team led by Penny, who looks after the comms side of things, and Lachlan, who leads our external affairs team responsible for media and messaging. So a bit of background about the CCN. As the most disaster-prone state in Australia, we do want to ensure Queensland remains at the forefront of leading Australia in our disaster response, and this includes comms. So the CCN was born out of the 2011 floods, if anyone remembers those in southeast Queensland, and then we had Cyclone Yasi up in far north Queensland, as a better way to coordinate comms across government. There's a lot more that happens than just the actual disaster event and that response, and the impacts across agencies are multifaceted. So, you know, schools are impacted, health systems, water systems, tourism, parks, and then how those impacts extend into our statutory bodies and local governments. Agencies can operate in silos, not on purpose, but they've got a job to do within their own portfolios. So this was a way to bring everyone together and just make sure everyone was on the same page in terms of having the same messages and the same situational awareness, at least. So under Queensland's disaster management arrangements, the CCN is responsible for setting the direction for and coordinating whole of government external comms and stakeholder engagement during a crisis. And we support the State Disaster Coordinator and the Premier as disaster leads. CCN is essentially a group made up of heads of comms, so that's heads of communication for our key state government agencies, statutory bodies, utility providers and local government, and we will pull in, you know, representatives as we identify the expertise are needed in response to that particular crisis. We're activated in response to a crisis and are responsible for supporting the lead agency, whoever that is identified as. We will look after things like coordinating daily, sometimes twice daily CCN meetings, and the timing of those meetings is really important, and it's usually held after a state disaster coordination meeting to ensure we can provide the most accurate situational update and can work with agencies on any emerging issues, coordinate messaging and whole of government comms plans, campaigns and stakeholder activity. Some of the lead agencies that we work with might be Queensland Police Service, who we have Chrissie here today, Queensland Fire Department, if we're working in a bushfire scenario, Transport and Main Roads, if we're working on a cyber type event, or even the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, to name a few. I think personally the success of the CCN is about a result of the relationships that are built by the members on it. So we really create that environment of collaboration and support. And as a result, you know, CCN members are really good at identifying who they need to talk to and when, and how to mitigate issues. The CCN is also supported by the Crisis Communication Advisory Group, which is a subgroup that provides advice and focuses on sort of maintaining that capability across government in terms of disaster preparedness and response. So we meet bi-monthly and make sure we're really prepared and have the capability across government to respond in a comms capacity. I'm going to stop there. Another structure that's really important in terms of the delivery of the CCN is the public information capability, or the PIC. But Lachlan led the PIC during the triple threats, so I'm going to hand over to him to take you through what that's all about. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Prue. And hopefully everyone can see me on the screen. I'm not at the wheel of this one, so hopefully I'm coming up and you can hear me okay. So it's great to be here and share our disaster experience, a triple threat disaster, in fact, and also over Christmas and New Year's, which obviously has some extra challenges with staffing and just, having the people available over that time when they should be having a good time with their families. So generally, if the CCN Crisis Communication Network is stood up, that means, the disasters are pretty much kicking off in full capacity. And that means that the public information capability is stood up as well. So the chair of the Crisis Communication Network will talk to the State Disaster Coordination Centre Coordinator, and they'll decide on activating the public information capability. So as the lead of the capability, I'll work closely with the chair of the CCN and stand up that function. So the PIC, as we fondly call it, collates and edits the delivery of the whole of government messaging during emergency and disaster events. So the information is dispersed as advice to local government and their affected communities, whole of government, ministerial offices as well, and the Premier's office, and designed to be public facing and approved with that in mind, with one of the aims of the messaging to not be operational and more designed to focus on public awareness content and what the public actually needs to know the government is doing proactively across all the agencies that are involved to manage the disaster response. So the PIC works closely during those disasters with the Queensland Police Service as they look after the State Disaster Coordination Centre. So myself as the lead, we were based out at the centre, and we had PIC operating with staff from across government. So every agency is required to contribute staff to roster the public information capability across the crisis response. So once the public information capability is stood up, we request that the agencies involved in the disaster response provide key messages in what they're doing proactively in the response space into the public information capability. And we collate all those, we go through them, we edit them, we make sure they're palatable, they're not too operational. We try to keep the document not too lengthy as well. So it's a bit of a job, and we'll either do those public messaging once or twice a day, depending on how quickly the disaster is moving and how much information we need to get out there. So there's an example up at the moment of the style of key messages we do. So we'll have current advice, and then we'll have the agency's messages off the back of that. And for example, even though you've got a cyclone and a weather event, a lot of agencies do feed into that. So in Queensland, we've got the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, so they'll feed into that, particularly through the recovery phase. Then we've got the Fire and Emergency Services, so they'll talk about where they're on the ground, how many SES volunteers are out and about. We've got Energex, they were feeding in as well, so they were talking about how many customers were impacted, when electricity supply would be back online. We have the Water Department and Seg Water.
Attention please, please. This is the Chief Fire Warden. We are about to carry out the monthly whip phone testing of your floor. All floor wardens, please make your way to the whip phone now and stand by for a call.
We were prepared to respond to
we are about to carry out the monthly whip phone testing of your floor. All floor wardens, please make your way to the whip phone now and stand by for a call. Thank you.
Just part of being prepared in Queensland.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't
I hope
stop.
none of you are wardens.
No.
So just on the one document, it doesn't have all the pages there, but just re-looking at it and reliving it, there was probably about 18 agencies that fed into that document because there's just so many moving parts to a disaster response. So there's a fair bit of work in it. But once the agencies provide their key messages, the PIC team needs to collate all that, pull it together within about an hour, and then get it approved up through the channels, and then it's dispersed to a network of about, I think it's about 1,300 people. So it goes out to a significant group as well. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers the PIC function.
Thanks, Lachlan. I think we'll have lots of questions about the PIC shortly, but we're always interested in securing a seat at the table, and I guess that's what comes first before a project can really work well. And you, Penny, you indicated in the award entry that this was one of the EMPA principles that this project really reflected. So can you talk about that aspect of the project?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. And I know this is one of your particular favourites of the principles you've mentioned before, and it is a key to the successful coordination of our agencies. So the Queensland Government recognises the importance of communications in any type of crisis response. And as such, we've improved our functions to have that seat at the table and to feed into the wider network, whether it be at a federal level, a state level, or the local community. And one of the key ways we've been able to achieve that is now with the CCN chair able to sit in at QDMC meetings, so Queensland Disaster Management Committees, which are chaired by the Premier. So having that seat as an observer, which is currently legislated before Parliament, so enshrined, we have that capacity now for the CCN chair to observe those high-level discussions, feed into them if necessary, and feed those back through CCN meetings. So we have that situational awareness of what's going on at that high level, but then also we want to work from the ground up and hear what's going on in local communities. And by doing that, we can talk amongst ourselves as comms leads and feed them back through our teams and make sure that we are targeting our key messaging to address those concerns both at the leadership level and then also at the grassroots level. And that's a really tricky task. It's a huge task when you think about it. There are lots of different stakeholders. They have all different means of communication, and we want to address all their concerns, but ultimately the goal is to keep Queenslanders safe. Another way we're able to do that is through the PIC coordinator, so Lachlan's role when he was out at the SDCC. He took part in capability leads meetings. So he was in coordination groups meeting where they're doing their operational response. And if Lachlan identified any issues perhaps in those leads meetings operationally that needed to be addressed with public information, he could then feed them back through the CCN and also add them to his key messaging that would go out to stakeholders. So it was really about addressing those concerns. So if you had disaster coordinators from the district saying this is happening in our community, we could then tailor our messaging to suit those concerns, and those were being fed up from a grassroots level as well. Also, the State Disaster Coordination Group is run out at Kedron where we were situated. So when the CCN's activated, our team works from the SDCC at Kedron, as does Lachlan's PIC, which is embedded within that capability. And we attended those meetings. There was an additional seat at the table there. So any statewide issues that were acknowledged, not at the Premier's level, were then fed back through the Crisis Communication Network. So that's essentially the function. And so several different seats, I think you could say.
Great. Thanks, Penny. When you really tested Cyclone Jasper's not the first thing that's happened to you since 2011 by any means, but when you're really testing it last year, can you talk a bit about the timeline of the cyclone and the QCCN deployment, and also then have a chat about what worked well?
Yeah, I can do that. We have a bit more from our presentation that I can share with you. So hopefully you can see this. Essentially, in the lead up to those three disasters that we had, we operate a whole year-round training function. So in the 2 weeks prior to Cyclone Jasper, we had an exercise scenario that was held out at Kedron. This is just coincidentally, serendipitously, some might say, where we tested our communications response to a tropical cyclone at Category 5 level. And that was just when we had the first warning signs of Jasper. So that training ended up being really fortuitous. We were able to take people around the SDCC, see how it worked, and also just bring our comms relationships up to scratch so that in times of emergency, we know the right people to call. So 2 weeks later, Jasper crossed the coast. And then we had the southeast Queensland storms. I don't know whether incorrectly referred to as a tornado or whether that's been established as such, which happened on Christmas night. So you can imagine there was a lot of scrambling happen at that stage. Our former CCN chair held a meeting the very next day where we brought together some very weary heads of communications to discuss what the next steps would be. So essentially, when that incident happened at the opposite end of the state, the CCN was actually already activated and meeting. So we essentially one event flowed into another. Then in January, obviously, we had Tropical Cyclone Kirrily. So normally you would see the CCN deactivate after an event, but in this case, it didn't happen at all. It just was continual. And you can imagine that there was some fairly fatigued people by the end of that process. So these are some of the challenges that we faced as a whole of government response. And just also further to what Prue was saying, I just want to acknowledge the fact that people are still recovering from this. It's still very much an active incident. It hasn't passed. People in the north are still struggling. A lot of people were removed from country and community and were relocated after some period of time. And so I just want to acknowledge that their struggles continue and that we haven't moved on from that. We're still in that recovery phase. But in terms of our immediate response, obviously we swore in a new premier at that period in time as Jasper crossed the coast. And so we really needed to support the new government and ensure that that transition went smoothly when responding to these crises. There was also a change in lead agency for disaster management. So recently you will see that those functions transferred from the Queensland Fire Department to Queensland Police Service. And so it was a switch in those agencies, which we had to accommodate. Maintaining that messaging across the 3 separate disasters over a short period. So incidentally, while these 3 incidents were happening in 3 different areas, we also had a heat wave going on at the same time. So we had messaging going out from Queensland Health about how to stay safe during a heat wave, while other areas of the state were flooded. So it was very, very challenging. Also, when you had areas of the north that had been struck multiple times by these events, there was a lot of fatigue in terms of messaging. And it's a real balance that you have to strike about keeping people prepared and resilient in response to these sorts of events. Obviously, there's a lot of online misinformation, and Chrissie will talk to that a bit later with the DICE team that was established by QPS, which were instrumental, I should say, in assisting us in that comms response. And also just reaching those remote communities was really difficult. So as we mentioned before, the CCN chair provided guidance to the new chair of the QDMC, which was our new premier, meeting daily to coordinate that whole of government messaging across multiple jurisdictions. So the Digital Intelligence and Community Engagement DICE team from QPS, they have the capability to respond directly through social media to misinformation online through myth busting. They would also produce a daily report for us, as well as the State Disaster Coordinator and a number of other stakeholders, and it would essentially identify areas and what community sentiment was like. So we could tailor our message to make sure we're not just listening to the bosses upstairs, but also the people on the ground who are actually experiencing these events. We want to make sure that if there's a gap in information or they're not hearing something, that we can address it. So also we reached out to NEMA, who do open source intelligence through scraping of social media, and they were able to provide us snapshots of community sentiment in areas, so we could make sure that if there were any areas that were suffering in particular, that we pivoted to focus on them and make sure our messaging was addressing them. Some of the ways that we targeted culturally and linguistically diverse and First Nations audiences was geo-targeted social posts in those particular areas and reaching out to local leadership, pre-translated warnings, and obviously you would have seen at the press conferences having Ausland on hand to interpret all of those press conferences. So that's essentially how the response went. I'm sure people have a few questions about that though. And it just really just shows how many people are involved in the coordination and some of the challenges that we faced.
Great. Thanks very much, Penny. I might just cross over to Chrissie. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the DICE team and how they work, and sort of what was the trigger for you to come in and help the CCN with that?
Right, well, we generally do deploy across to the State Disaster Coordinator when on activation to provide assistance to the Deputy Commissioner. So we're generally already there, but on this occasion, we did decide to take members of the DICE team across. So they're the Digital Intelligence and Community Engagement team, they're specialist online team. They were established in sort of mid-2023, but during 2024, we did start to bring them across to disaster management as well. They're doing such a great job in the crime area and youth crime particularly, where we needed to identify youth offenders who were what they call boasting online about their crimes. So we're tapping into those local community groups to provide help there on how to report crime, for example. So they're already really quite well established when we brought them across into disaster management 2024. They assisted us through the bushfires as well. And where we're not the lead agency with fires, we do also work collaboratively with QFD to amplify their messaging. So that's where DICE came into the fold again, amplifying that messaging into very specific community areas. And so they were ready to hit the ground running by the time the severe weather season came in across Christmas. And as Penny said, yeah, I've just been instrumental in building those relationships with the community groups, because obviously they're run by volunteers a lot of the time. So there was a lot of trust to build there, a lot of transparency to allow the DICE team to become part of those community groups. So they're in there well and truly now and providing great support to everyone as far as amplifying that messaging is concerned.
Chrissie, is that team 24/7?
They're not 24/7, but they do work quite late into the afternoon. And during activation, we would certainly look at deploying them overnight if required. They're certainly available too.
Yeah.
So I think we would look at that into the future, yes.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of lessons to look at this year and developments as well, given that they're a reasonably new team. But certainly we'll be having them along to the SDCC whenever possible from here.
Okay, so what was one of the key lessons?
The key lessons was mainly that engagement, the transparency, building that trust with the community groups more than anything else, because they could really target those specific areas where the media team and our social media team can provide a lot of messaging on social media, which can be shared quite easily. DICE are quite specific in their actual community groups. They've got different areas that they look after, and they can really tap into that really local conversation and do that social listening as well. So we can find out how happy the community is with the response that we're providing, if there's other areas that we should be looking at, other ways of communicating that we should be looking at. So they can provide all that kind of sentiment reporting back to us as well, which was really, really helpful.
That's really exciting. I'm going to cross back to Lachlan now, because we've got a question on the Q&A. Lisa Glass is really interested in whether the PIC concept and the broader coordination system is similar to the US NIMS Joint Information System and the Joint Information Centre model, the JIC, or did you sort of develop that independently?
So concerningly, Lisa, I had to quickly Google US NIMS to find out what it was. So I'm probably not the person that's going to answer this question well. So the public information capability for Queensland was developed a bit before my time. So I'm not 100% sure where the concept came from. And the timeline, I'd be taking a punt, but it's been around for about 10 years, the PIC roughly. Yeah, so it's been around for a while. As a government person and not a politician, but I'll still request that I can take that question on notice and try to get back to you on that one.
I might be able to help a little bit.
Oh, great.
The AIMS system is actually based on the US NIMS system, and the background of AIMS did consider the Joint Information Centre model. So maybe there probably would be some knowledge of how that worked, but it's that was back in the 70s when that sort of all started emerging. So let's go to, you talked about the things that worked well there, Penny, but so have you made any changes Oh, sorry. Have you made any changes as a result of the summer's incidents?
Well, this isn't as a direct result, but something we should point out, a significant change is that the transferal of the PIC functions has happened recently. So recently that has transitioned from DPC, which we led, and has now gone to QPS. But it's an ongoing agreement. It's more of an arrangement where we help each other. So Chrissie is now the PIC coordinator, and she will be all year round driving changes to the PIC, improvements to the PIC in training and how it functions. So we did a review of the PIC post events and just talked about what things we could do a little bit better in terms of defining the roles of the officers situated with the PIC, how we could expand training and make it a bit more comprehensive, bringing in comms professionals. So as the CCN operates, we have the ability to bring in people to back staff during events when we find that there's staff fatigue in back-to-back events. PIC staffing's a little bit different. There's a roster set up of specifically trained PIC staff. So I think a lot of the back-end work we did was just around formalising that process for PIC a bit better in that transition to QPS, and just seeing how we can develop it into something more moving forward, and also further ways of incorporating that intelligence that we heard about coming from both the DICE team and also NEMA. So we've met with both of those capabilities separate post-event, just to see how moving forward we can expand on that intelligence being fed through, and even ways that we can provide a snapshot up to the Premier of some of the things people are feeling within the community, just so there's that wider knowledge and awareness of what's going on. We also conducted a post-incident survey. So within our team, we have the Behavioural Economics Research Team, affectionately known as BERT. They helped devise a survey where we could send out to CCN members and just get some feedback as to what could be done a bit better. So we're in the process of implementing some of those action items. I just think one of the things that keeps popping up is fatigue. And when you've got comms staff, certainly when you're activated over Christmas and New Year, you've got a lot of people away, and you've got a lot of people operating during COVID and illness, and it's just about drawing on capability and that experience across government and being able to support one another and help one another through these types of incidents. And I still think there's room for improvement in that area, where whether we can feed into each other's agencies, learn a bit more about what we can do for each other and how we can respond, and having, as Prue mentioned, not operating in silos.
Thanks for that. Queensland's a really big state. How do you cope with all of the regional differences within, how does the network sort of work with all of that?
I'm going to take that question, Barb, and I might get Penny and Lachlan to jump in as they need, but it is really hard, I think, when you're in Brisbane and you've got a really distinct community, sometimes, with cultural considerations that you need to support during those periods. But I think that's where it's really important that the CCN can really quickly identify what representation is best to sit on the group during the response. We do work really closely with local councils. We work really closely with the local Government Association of Queensland. We need to identify who the spokespersons are, spokespeople are in community, and find a way to connect with them so that we can make sure that we are getting those messages from Brisbane up to the regions. We also have a lot of agencies with regional offices, and it's about leveraging the knowledge on the ground as well through those agencies. So it really is about that interconnectivity between the agencies, between their offices, between community, between local government. So it's really important that the CCN has really good communicators and connectors sitting on it. And I think another consideration is around the CCN not growing so big that we, lose trust. People get lost in who's online and feel like they can't speak up because they're not quite sure, of who's there and how they can connect. So I think it's really about keeping that connection between the network so that when we all jump online, we all know each other, and it lends itself to that trust within the group. So I think that's a really fine balance as well.
I think as well, from the public information capability perspective, it's about having a seat at the table when you're at the SDCC as well. So when they have those capability leads meetings, you've actually got the capability lead for, in this case, Queensland Police Service, that is tapping into their people on the ground in those specific regions. So they're getting real-time information that then feeds into those 7 a.m. meetings. And then we make sure whatever key messages are going out aligns and assists with what's happening on the ground in those regions. And as PIC evolves, particularly with all the new technology we can use in tracking media and tracking social media, that'll be certainly something that's definitely tapped into. So those local community social media content and also media content. And it's also about, tracking what's the local mayor saying in their area. What are they saying the issues are? Yeah. Is there a local councillor that's piped up on social media or in the media that said, well, this is a problem? So are our key messages reacting to that issue? Are we aware of that issue? So it's about that on-ground awareness and how we're tracking that as well. But the technology now is fantastic, but always evolving. So it's about keeping up with that as well.
And also in terms of the CCN, when responding to the disasters in different areas of the state, just an example like Lachlan gave about media monitoring, in terms of what each of the agencies doing, just how they operated collaboratively. Everyone spoke about what campaigns they were currently running at the moment. And we realised very quickly that with these disasters happening, we had to target our campaigns very carefully. You didn't want campaigns that weren't suited to the situation on air. So we specifically, QRA, for instance, pushed its Get Ready Queensland campaign, and then they had If It's Flooded, Forget It. So we ramped up those campaigns and then slowly scaled back some of the others that were in market, just to reflect the severity of the situation.
I love that. It's just that one line in your award entry just showed how valuable it was when you could incorporate campaigns from other agencies that are in this space and not contradict messaging or any of those sorts of things. I'm going to put you on the spot a bit here, guys. I'm wondering if there's any community that comes to mind where the flow of information from the CCN has really showed its worth or sort of become evidently seamless.
I think during the response in particular, I don't know if Chrissie can speak to this more, but I definitely saw the impact of DICE within those community groups, because what we were seeing in terms of misinformation, people would go into these Facebook groups and say, oh, I heard this was happening, or how do I evacuate here? And DICE just had that capability to reach directly in. I'm pretty sure it was around the Mackay area from memory, Chrissie, and respond directly to any of those misinformation that they saw, disinformation, you could call it, and respond to people's concerns. And just to have that level of trust, especially in this day and age, post-COVID, so to speak, the fact that the team had that level of trust that it could intervene in those conversations and set the record straight, I just found that to be really, really getting down to that grassroots level with public information. I mean, we can only do so much. There's so much key messaging we can put out, and they're done through local governments as well. But people really are, it's the age of social media, and that's where people are having conversations at the moment. I don't know if you had any more to add, Chrissie.
I was actually just going to agree with you, Penny. It's definitely that level of trust. I think the DICE team's just done such a tremendous job there with really tapping into those community groups and building that trust really early on, so they become that real source of truth. which used to be the QPS Facebook page and still remains that way. But now we've got that added benefit of people who can really just zone into specific areas with specific information and be allowed in there, be welcomed into these community groups as well. It's just really fantastic. So very exciting times for the DICE team, I think.
Thanks, Chrissie. We've got a question from Kerry Battersby, who's from Queensland Farmers Federation. She says, Queensland Farmers Federation encourages farmers to fill in the DAF Disaster Impact Survey, that's Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, to inform agencies of damage and impact. How do the responses help CCN for on-ground information, and is there anything they could do to improve the survey?
I think always that we would work collaboratively with these agencies, and Prue mentioned the crisis advisory group that we have operating when the CCN is not activated. Items like that would really be of benefit for us to share with those lead agencies involved with that group, because moving forward, we're looking to scale up and improve our response each time. So any surveys or feedbacks that come through these groups, we are really keen to get our hands on. And also now that we have that ability within our own team to put that behavioural lens on those surveys, they're really good at coming up with, targeted responses. So we have that capability now, and we would definitely be interested in collaborating with these agencies and also local government more. I think that's another learning. We would really like to get more involved at that local government level and hear community concerns, because it differs no matter what part of the state. We think the North is really resilient, which they are. They're probably the most resilient people we know, but it's also very bruising having one disaster after the next, and it does affect communities. So we would really like to hear from farmers and other corporations or industries, I should say, alike, and see that feedback.
And also it's interesting you mentioned that, because DAF do feed quite a bit of content into our public information messaging around financial recovery assistance, disaster assistance loans, where people can go for freight assistance, any issues relating to DAF around those local government areas. But also one of the messages is for producers they're encouraged to fill in the disaster impact survey. So obviously it's a very key point for DAF.
Prue, I think it was you that talked about being conscious of not letting the group get too big. How do you manage that?
I think I just made that up because of my experience on groups that do get too big, and then it's hard to have conversation that's actually meaningful, or people are, sort of a bit unaware of the context of the environment in which they're speaking. So with the CCN, there is one representative per agency related to the disaster or crisis in question. Where we need more representatives, they will seek, will request to have those additional members. But I think it's about having that person that has the authority to, make decisions or provide advice really quickly. So it's usually that, head of communication of that agency. And then, so that's we've got about 20 agencies, as in state government departments. And then we will look at one representative from, local government, the energy provider, the water provider, whoever's providing that assistance from a stat body or supplier point of view. So that's how we keep it small, and we connect regularly throughout the year as well. So it's not like we only come together during disaster. We connect all the time and build that relationship between us.
Prue, I think in the award entry, you were talking about having Local Government Association of Queensland on board on the CCN, but you dealt with that differently during the Jasper Tornado Kirrily incident. Can you explain how that worked?
Yes, I might flick over to Penny because she was obviously directly involved. But yes, I believe we did.
So yeah, we had the Local Government Association of Queensland very much involved in the CCN during our response process, and we could reach out through the various local governments to find out exactly what their concerns was. We did take it a step further, and that's what I think you might be referring to, Barb, where we did invite comms representatives and even a couple of the mayors to some of our CCN meetings. The learnings that we had from that was just to coordinate better around their emergency meetings, so making the times work for them. But it gets really tricky when you have various levels of government involved having their own crisis meetings, and then local government as well. So that's something we can look at moving forward. So we did have CEOs and some mayors on board, just so they had a bit more of a wider understanding of what we were doing in media and comms at a statewide level, and how they could potentially feed into that messaging, and also identify any gaps, things that they weren't getting through, things that their community members were asking them. One of the ways we address that, obviously in terms of recovery, people want to know about funding. So we decided to put together a fact sheet, and there were multiple agencies that fed into that, including community recovery. So we did a whole of government fact sheet to respond to some of the key concerns that people had, and a lot of that was to do with recovering and how they could access funding. So it was just about plugging into some of those more local concerns and not just operating above everything else at a state level.
Okay, Penny, can you also explain how you make the transition from response to recovery?
So there is an actual declaration that occurs at the State Disaster Coordination Centre. A decision is made in coordination with the State Disaster Coordinator, I should say, from QPS, and they will decide at what stage of the event the transition to recovery occurs. When that happens, QRA steps up as the lead agency, as they're the lead for Queensland in response to that. Recovery is ongoing, as we've mentioned several times. It can take years to recover from events such as these, and it really is testament to the work being done in Queensland, as we are the most disaster prone state in Australia. So it's a very protracted, but in terms of the SDC operational, it's eventually stood down, I think usually some time into recovery, and then the CCN may not be deactivated straight away. If there's extensive recovery operations going on, the CCN will continue to operate more on a lower level in the background and address concerns as they arise.
Okay, Lisa's got another question. She loves that senior leaders are being linked into those meetings at the crucial times. How easy was it to convince them, and how did you convince them they needed to prioritise this in their schedules?
I think the previous chair of the CCN, Michelle Wellington, really advocated for the importance of comms within a disaster response, and she did a lot of active work as chair of the CCN and also of the Crisis Communications Advisory Group. So a lot of work has been done in the background advocating for the importance of comms and just to create awareness of the CCN. A lot of the times when there weren't active incidents, people didn't know what the CCN was. It was operational during COVID, but not in this immediate response. Obviously, COVID again was a protracted event. So I just think it was constant advocacy, and it's part of the work that you do, Barb, as well, with trying to promote the importance of comms in disaster, and it's only becoming more prevalent within recent times. So I just think it takes constant jockeying, advocacy, and just showing how important it is. And I'm very lucky in that the Department of Premier and Cabinet has acknowledged the importance of having that all-round preparedness response, hence the all hazards crisis capability was established. So we have policy people in our team as well that provide us with key advice about how we can evolve the state disaster management plan and have comms more present within those documents as well. So there's a lot of ways that it can be achieved.
Guys who are listening, please put up your questions. We've only got a few minutes to go, 8 to be precise. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the advisory group. Who's on that and how does that work?
Do you want to take this one?
Yes, so the advisory group is from the key lead agencies within disasters. So it is much of a smaller group, but we do have the heads of communications from QPS, QFD, health, also DAF, I believe, are involved in that. I'll miss all of the agencies, but QRA. So the ones that would normally take the lead during any event, and obviously DAF for biosecurity, DTMR, who are the cyber lead within the Queensland government as well. So we essentially meet every 2 months, the heads of communications from those groups, and this is where we come up with ongoing items. So we obviously did a debrief following the 3 events and came up with learnings from that. Action items, we share what exercises we're currently working on, look at other avenues to develop exercises and so for instance, that exercise I told you about, the category 5 cyclone one we ran, came out of our CAG, as we would call it, meeting, where QRA said, look, we're heading into cyclone season, we need to look at exploring how we would respond. And so essentially we staged that out at the SDCC, and it just so happened that Jasper occurred 2 weeks later. But as a result of that, we had that knowledge of how the SDCC worked. We had more comms professionals on board that understood what the CCN was. So it's just really important to have that all year round preparedness and resilience piece going, and seeing what we could be doing in the comms space to better equip ourselves. And definitely one thing is we're looking at trying to target those audiences, those smaller audiences, and how we can do it better.
Okay, probably one last question. I didn't sort of prepare you for this one, so apologies. The Queensland disaster management space has been changing quite a bit recently. There's a lot of expansion going on and new comms roles coming up, and splitting of functions from fire into storm and things like that. How has that sort of worked over the time that you were coping with all of this?
So I think the transition, which I touched briefly on, was occurring. We timed it in particular, or it was timed by the government to happen prior to that disaster season. So the transition of the disaster management arrangements had already occurred between QFES at the time and QPS. And so as those arrangements moved over, I mean, QPS have been the lead agency for maybe 6 months. I think it was November of last year now, but obviously are no strangers to dealing with emergency response. So it was just more about reacquainting everyone, I think, with the SDCC. I know Chrissie might have more on that, having had to pivot from that previous role to taking the lead, I guess, out at the SDCC.
I think that works sort of ongoing, to be honest, Penny. So this year will be, as Lachlan pointed out, the first year that we'll be the lead in the PIC. So we're doing exercising around that and retraining of staff in that space. But again, like Penny said, it's nothing new. So the staff will take to that training very, very quickly. We're also a 24-hour operation here at Police Media as well. So we always have staff available to populate the PIC or to be there to support the bosses in any way, whether there's press conferences happening or there's key messaging that needs to be developed. So it's a bit of a work in progress at the moment. We are really, really happy to have our DPC colleagues, Penny and Lachlan and Prue, to help us work through the PIC. They've got it as a very well-oiled machine. So I'm hoping to keep it that way, fingers crossed. But I'm certainly looking for their support as well and their direction to help me through this year, particularly as we start to move into disaster season. So it'll be all hands on deck, I think. But so far, I think, yeah, the collaboration between all the agencies, we're doing really, really well. We've also picked up the likes of emergency alerts from QFD, which the team is learning as well. So that's just another way of communicating with the public as well. So, there's a lot of training going on, but we're all very, very excited about taking the lead in a few different areas this year.